What will happen to Donald Trump if judges rule his Hatch Act charges are baseless? What happens when the justice system collides head-on with Donald Trump's political ambitions? Right now, Trump is facing Hatch Act charges, accusations that he abused the power of public office for his own political gain. But here's the twist. What if judges ultimately rule those charges as baseless? Would it clear the path for Trump to rebrand himself as the perpetual victim of a so-called witch hunt, rallying his supporters with even more fuel for 2024? Or would it expose dangerous gaps in the law, raising questions about accountability, ethics, and whether the Hatch Act has any teeth left at all? This isn't just a legal technicality, it's about the credibility of American democracy and whether leaders are truly bound by the same rules as everyone else. Stay tuned as we break it down right now. The legal entanglements surrounding Donald Trump have often defied precedent, tested the boundaries of American institutions, and blurred the line between political theater and judicial process. Among the arsenal of defenses, distractions, and counterattacks deployed by Trump and his allies, the invocation of the Hatch Act to challenge special counsel Jack Smith represents one of the most ironic twists. The Hatch Act, originally designed to insulate the federal workforce from partisan exploitation, has been reimagined by Trump's team as a weapon against the prosecutor charged with holding him accountable. At the heart of the controversy is a claim advanced by Senator Tom Cotton and others in Trump's orbit, that Jack Smith's urgency in prosecuting Trump amounts to political campaigning, thereby violating the Hatch Act. Yet the statute, by its design and history, is poorly suited to such a charge. It is not a criminal statute, but an administrative one, enforced through fines or disciplinary actions, and has traditionally been applied to civil servants engaged in overt partisan activities while on duty. If the judiciary rules these Hatch Act charges baseless, the consequences will ripple far beyond the immediate dismissal of a procedural argument. Such a ruling would reinforce prosecutorial independence, undercut Trump's broader strategy of delegitimization, and highlight the enduring irony of a president who once disregarded the Hatch Act, now attempting to use it as a shield. It would also shape the political landscape of 2024 by clarifying the limits of Trump's defenses and reminding the public that the law, however beleaguered, remains capable of delivering clarity. The Hatch Act of 1939 was passed to ensure that the federal civil service remained insulated from partisan politics. It bars federal employees from engaging in overt political activity while performing their official duties. The purpose was to maintain public trust in a professional government that serves citizens, not campaigns. Over the decades, enforcement has been uneven but generally consistent. Violations lead to administrative penalties, reprimands, or fines. Importantly, the Hatch Act is not a criminal statute. It does not carry prison time or felony charges. It was never intended as a tool to upend high-profile prosecutions or to protect political candidates from legal accountability. Trump's relationship with the Hatch Act is fraught. During his first term, more than 30 officials in his administration, including Kellyanne Conway and Jared Kushner, were cited for violations. Press briefings were turned into campaign rallies, and federal property was used as a backdrop for overtly political events. The Office of Special Counsel, responsible for enforcement, issued scathing reports about the administration's disregard for the statute. Trump dismissed these concerns, treating the Hatch Act as an inconvenience rather than a guardrail. Against this background, Trump's invocation of the Hatch Act against Jack Smith is a study in irony. The claim is that by pushing prosecutions forward so they could proceed before the 2024 election, Smith engaged in political activity. The accusation seeks to invert the statute's purpose. Instead of preventing civil servants from campaigning on the taxpayer dime, it is reframed as preventing prosecutors from moving swiftly in cases that involve candidates. The structural weakness of this claim is clear. Prosecutors are expected to move cases forward according to evidence and law, not to stall because of an election calendar. If their efficiency could be rebranded as political activity, any high-profile defendant could shield themselves simply by announcing candidacy. That interpretation would neuter the rule of law whenever an election approached, effectively granting temporary immunity to candidates. The Hatch Act accusations against Jack Smith did not emerge organically from evidence of misconduct. They originated in a complaint promoted by Senator Tom Cotton, a vocal Trump ally. Cotton's argument was that Smith's timeline for indictments and trials represented election interference, violating the principle of neutrality. The Office of Special Counsel, a whistleblower agency distinct from the Department of Justice's special counsels, opened a file, as it is obliged to when receiving such complaints. Trump and his media ecosystem seized on the existence of the complaint as proof of impropriety. Conservative outlets framed Smith's prosecutions as politically tainted, while Trump himself amplified the narrative of persecution. Yet when Smith's attorneys responded, they dismissed the allegations as wholly without merit, emphasizing that all prosecutorial decisions were guided by evidence, Department of Justice guidelines, and the principle of avoiding political influence rather than embracing it. This framing matters. The complaint was not evidence-driven, but politically manufactured. It demonstrates how Trump weaponizes process itself. The mere existence of a complaint becomes a talking point, regardless of its substance. The judiciary, therefore, is tasked not only with adjudicating the merits, but with resisting being drawn into a political spectacle. If judges rule that the Hatch Act charges are baseless, the first and most direct consequence will be the reinforcement of prosecutorial independence. Prosecutors cannot operate under the constant threat that moving efficiently in politically sensitive cases will be redefined as election interference. Such a ruling would establish a precedent that urgency does not equal partisanship. It would affirm that prosecutors are permitted, indeed obligated, to pursue cases based on evidence and timelines that respect both due process and the principle of a speedy trial. To suggest otherwise would cripple accountability whenever public officials are involved. For Jack Smith, a judicial rejection would vindicate his approach. His career has been defined by adherence to rules and guidelines, from war crimes prosecutions at The Hague to complex public corruption cases in the United States. A ruling that clears him of Hatch Act allegations would not only silence critics, but cement his image as a prosecutor who places law above politics. For the Department of Justice more broadly, it would provide reassurance. Future prosecutors handling politically sensitive cases could point to this precedent as protection from frivolous Hatch Act claims. The independence of the prosecutorial function would be strengthened, ensuring that accountability does not yield to electoral considerations. Trump's legal strategy has long been characterized by delay, distraction, and delegitimization. The Hatch Act accusations fit neatly within this playbook. They generate headlines, create the impression of controversy, and consume judicial time. But if courts dismiss these charges as baseless, Trump loses one of his narrative weapons. He can no longer claim that the prosecutions themselves are tainted by a violation of federal ethics law. The argument that he is the victim of politically motivated persecution would suffer another blow. This matters because Trump's defenses are less about prevailing in court than about shaping public perception. He seeks to maintain the loyalty of his base by portraying himself as a martyr of the deep state. Yet judicial rejections accumulate. Voters may not parse every filing, but they recognize patterns. When Trump repeatedly raises defenses that collapse under judicial scrutiny, the credibility of his broader narrative erodes. Moreover, a ruling against Hatch Act claims underscores the fragility of Trump's defense. If he must rely on such tenuous arguments, what does that reveal about the strength of his case in more substantive charges? Election interference, obstruction, mishandling classified documents? The contrast becomes stark. Prosecutors build on evidence. Trump builds on distractions. The battle over the Hatch Act is not only legal, but institutional. Trump has spent years attacking the legitimacy of the judiciary, the Department of Justice, the intelligence community, and even local election officials. By accusing Jack Smith of violating ethics laws, Trump attempts to delegitimize the very mechanisms of accountability. A judicial ruling that these charges are baseless would serve as a moment of institutional restoration. It would demonstrate that courts can separate frivolous allegations from substantive claims, refusing to allow political maneuvers to derail legal processes. That message is critical in an era of cynicism. Not all Americans will be persuaded. Trump's most committed supporters are unlikely to accept the legitimacy of rulings against him. But for independents and less partisan voters, such decisions reinforce that institutions still function. They remind the public that while politics thrives on spectacle, the judiciary can still deliver definitive answers. Public trust is fragile, but rulings that consistently reject baseless claims strengthen the scaffolding of democracy. Each rejection becomes a reminder that the rule of law is resilient, even in the face of unprecedented political assaults. History offers ample precedent for politically charged prosecutions and the accusations of partisanship that accompany them. During Watergate, Richard Nixon denounced Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox as politically motivated. History now remembers Nixon's accusations as deflection. The Saturday Night Massacres, when Nixon ordered Cox's dismissal, backfired spectacularly, strengthening the perception of presidential guilt. In the 1990s, independent counsel Ken Starr faced criticism for expanding his investigation of Bill Clinton from financial dealings to personal misconduct. Yet courts consistently upheld his authority. Accusations of partisanship were part of the political narrative, but legally his actions were legitimate. The Hatch Act allegations against Jack Smith follow this pattern. Politicians under investigation frequently cry partisanship. What distinguishes the Hatch Act claim is its novelty and weakness. Unlike Nixon's arguments about privilege or Clinton's arguments about scope, the Hatch Act was never designed to police prosecutorial conduct. A judicial rejection would thus align with historical precedent. Courts dismiss politically motivated claims that seek to obscure substantive accountability. The controversy also highlights the judges overseeing Trump's cases, particularly Eileen Cannon in Florida and Tanya Chutkan in Washington, D.C. Cannon, a Trump appointee, has been criticized for rulings perceived as favorable to him in the classified documents case. Chutkan, by contrast, has emphasized that the legal process cannot be dictated by political calendars. If both judges, despite their differing reputations, reject Hatch Act claims, the message is powerful. Across ideological divides, the judiciary recognizes these allegations as meritless. Such unity would further weaken Trump's argument that he is the victim of a partisan conspiracy. It also illustrates the resilience of appellate review. Even if sympathetic judges were tempted to entertain Hatch Act claims, higher courts would likely correct them. The judiciary, despite its imperfections, remains capable of coherence. No discussion of this controversy is complete without acknowledging the irony. Trump presided over an administration notorious for Hatch Act violations. Senior officials used federal platforms for partisan purposes, often brazenly. The Office of Special Counsel's reports describe systemic disregard for the statute. Trump shrugged off these findings, treating the Hatch Act as irrelevant. Now he invokes the same law as a shield. The inconsistency is glaring. For Trump, laws and norms are obstacles when they constrain him, but weapons when they can be turned against opponents. If judges dismiss Hatch Act charges as baseless, the irony will be sharpened. It will underscore Trump's hypocrisy and highlight the opportunism of his legal strategy. Voters may not know the statute in detail, but they understand double standards. Trump's sudden embrace of a law he once mocked reveals the emptiness of his arguments. The political consequences of a judicial rejection will be significant. Trump thrives on narratives of persecution. Each dismissal of his claims chips away at that storyline. He will continue to insist that the system is rigged, but the weight of judicial rulings accumulates. For Democrats, the outcome provides ammunition. They can argue that Trump not only faces substantive charges, but also attempts to manipulate laws cynically, only to be rebuked by courts. It reinforces the portrayal of Trump as a manipulator of institutions rather than a victim of them. Republicans face a dilemma. Some will echo Trump's narrative, but others may tire of defending arguments that collapse in court. Down-ballot candidates may seek distance from a leader whose legal defenses repeatedly fail. The party must decide whether to tie itself to perpetual denial or to pivot toward more credible ground. For voters, the ruling could provide rare clarity. Amid the noise of allegations and counter-allegations, a definitive judicial rejection cuts through. It reminds the public that while politics may confuse, the law can still clarify. That clarity may shape perceptions heading into 2024, influencing not only Trump's prospects, but the credibility of institutions themselves. If judges rule that the Hatch Act charges against Jack Smith are baseless, the consequences will reverberate widely. It would reinforce prosecutorial independence, weaken Trump's strategy of distraction, and restore some measure of public trust in institutions. It would align with historical precedent, underscore judicial coherence, and highlight the irony of Trump invoking a law he once ignored. Politically, it would shape narratives heading into 2024, clarifying that Trump's defenses often collapse under scrutiny. The episode illustrates the stakes of this moment. The rule of law is tested not only by the substantive charges against Trump, but by the procedural distractions he deploys. The judiciary's willingness to dismiss such distractions determines whether accountability remains intact. A ruling that Hatch Act claims are baseless would affirm that the law cannot be twisted into a shield for those who once disregarded it. It would mark another step in the ongoing struggle to ensure that, even in a polarized era, justice remains distinct from politics.